Welcome back to the Real News Network and our coverage of the inauguration of President Barack Obama. We're joined again by Robert Barosage. He's the president of the Institute for America's Future. Glenn Ford is an accomplished commentator. See, it says that. You're accomplished. Did you write my accomplished commentator? Of the blackagendareport.com. And Matt Welch is the editor-in-chief of the monthly journal Reason. And this is a leading libertarian journal, and Matt used to be the editorial page editor for the Los Angeles Times. And I don't know, were you too libertarian for the Los Angeles Times? So Robert, let me read you a quote from President Obama. He says, "There are some who question the scale of our ambitions, who suggest that our system cannot tolerate too many big plans. Their memories are short, for they have forgotten what this country has already done." So what are the big plans, and who's he talking about? I actually, when I watch Sunday morning show on Fox and I hear William Crystal praising President Obama, who exactly is it that's questioning his big plan?
Well, there's a general Washington consensus among the nabobs of the establishment that you can't do too many things as president. So they keep telling the president to have one or two goals. You can only get one or two things done.
But they're all freaking out. I mean, the economic crisis is so dire.
It changes it. But if you look at what he said he wants to do in the campaign and repeatedly, it's besides, in addition to the recovery, which is the first task, obviously, and requires us to change the economic model along the way. He said he's going to do universal health care reform. I think that will come out of the administration early, and we will have a fight about it this year. He says he's going to move us to a new energy, sustainable energy economy with both investments in alternative energy and in efficiency, and that's built into the recovery plan as a down payment on that. And that's obviously a centerpiece of what he's doing. And then he said he's going to do a big investment agenda in terms of education. From pre-K to affordable college, that's a centerpiece of his campaign promises. So that's a lot already on the investment side. And then he's talked about other things which I think he is probably less committed to, but those are the big projects I think he is committed to.
So Glenn, the question is, does that address the underlying problems in the economy? You build some schools, you hire some people, the special funds run out. You may have some schools, but you still don't have people with long-term jobs. And you also haven't dealt with any of the underlying question of purchasing power. I mean, wages haven't been going anywhere for years, and people have been borrowing money. So what do you make? I mean, do you think the stimulus package is needed now? And if it's needed, does it work in any long-term way?
Well, we keep on hearing the term shovel-ready, that these projects that are ready to go will be the ones that are funded because of the necessity to start spending money any which way we can. But shovel-ready projects would be state projects that the states claim they were going to do anyway. You ought to take that with a grain of salt. But some projects may well jump up there that have post-dated plans. But what I'd really like to say about that is that
I'm not sure anyone will care at this point. I mean, they just want to spend some money fast.
What we do when we pour massive amounts of money into the so-called shovel-ready projects that states wanted to do or were planning to do anyway is to continue whatever social relationships existed before. If we're talking about shovel-ready programs that states had already planned to fund themselves, then we're talking about continuing whatever social relationships existed before the meltdown.
This is really kind of a critical question, because in one of the key quotes, I'll read this. He says, the question we ask today is not whether our government is too big or too small, but whether it works. And then he does raise the critical question, which is works for who? Because it's not work in the abstract. He could have left the sentence there, and he didn't. He goes on, he says, whether it helps families find jobs at a decent wage, care they can afford, and a retirement that's dignified. So that's saying, it's not just about working, and usually if you don't say who it works for, one kind of assumes it works for Wall Street. So he's actually saying it has to work for working families. So are we seeing that?
I think every president and every presidential candidate has said that they're going to fight for working families and the middle class since time immemorial. I mean, those are nice words, and we'll see what comes out of them. They're not tied to specific policies necessarily, and I wouldn't expect them to be. And there's also, built into that, there's kind of a false, dodge. It's not a question whether the government's too big or too small. Well, there is a limited supply of money. There really is. It's like GDP. There's an upward limit on it.
Of course, depending on your tax policy, that changes quite a bit.
Right, but I mean that has an effect. You can't. You have to make hard decisions, and that's also kind of what he's saying in things that we're going to, find out which programs work and eliminate them. And I actually wrote a hopeful column about Barack Obama, believe it or not, in a libertarian publication.
I'll believe it. If William Crystal can go on Fox in the morning,
well, exactly.
Why can't you?
No, that actually speaks to something. William Crystal and David Brooks, do not be surprised when those guys jump all aboard the Obama train.
Rupert Murdoch jumped aboard a long time ago.
National greatness conservatism is big government conservatism. George Bush, despite anything that you hear sort of in mainstream discussion, he's the biggest government president we've had since Lyndon Johnson. He's issued more regulations than anyone since Richard Nixon. It wasn't a question of we deregulated the entire country over the last 8 years. It's not that. That didn't happen. Sarbanes-Oxley happened on his watch. Glass-Steagall happened
a little
on
too
Clinton's.
late. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but there's this revisionist history that's very convenient for Obama because he gets to run against something. But I think he's actually going to be governing more in the tradition of Bush when it comes to using the government as the locus of the solution for things. And this will especially happen on things like the bailout. What you're going to see in the next year is just bailing out for everything. Detroit's going to get a bailout. Local and state governments are going to get bailouts they're asking for. Pension funds all over the place are going to be asking for bailouts. And that's going to soak up a lot of what is a finite resource, which is money.
Robert, there's a key issue which so far we have not heard Barack Obama speak about, and that's the Employee Free Choice Act and the whole issue the unions are raising, that if one of the fundamental issues is lack of purchasing power, then workers need higher wages, in which case they need the right to organize unions. Yet we saw Obama and the Democrats join in an auto bailout that more or less told the workers, go take the conditions of ununionized workers.
Right.
And we haven't heard much about the Employee Free Choice Act from the leadership of the Democratic Union.
Right, I think that's been pretty clear that since the election, he hasn't said much about it. On the other hand, he did appoint as Labor Secretary Hilda Solis, who is a champion of the Employee Free Choice Act, and so he's at least brought into his administration a strong voice for it. I think you've got to have an aggressive wage policy out of this administration, not just EFCA, not just the Free Choice Act, but higher minimum wages, a whole range of things that empower workers to get a fair share of the profits and productivity that gets eventually created if we have a recovery. And the reason is when Bush was claiming this economy was growing and working over the last decade, wages were stagnant. All those rewards went to the top, really very few, the top 1%. And we've got to change that balance of power, the social relations Glenn was talking about, and it's going to take government initiatives to do that. So I think I'm worried that he hasn't talked about it early in his administration, but I think if you want to solve the problem of this economy, you've got to get to it.
And if you're going to change this dynamic of social relationships, one would think there's going to have to be a movement that has its own independence and can say no if they don't like something Obama's doing. But right now, out in the streets, there's a rather euphoric several millions of people and rather euphoric people across the country, and I'm all for euphoria, I guess. But the question is this motion going to take an independent position, or is it kind of under the auspices or tutelage of the campaign? Because the campaign just seems to be continuing.
Yeah, that is really the question. We at Black Agenda Report are not. We don't really think that what Obama does is the story, because we're pretty confident about what he's going to do, that he's shown his center-right hand. The real story is how do progressives react? How long is this honeymoon going to last?
I shouldn't say just progressive, because there's I think it's interesting in the libertarian movement. There's a whole mass movement there around Ron Paul, and so there's kind of various sections of
to
movement.
Speak for the libertarians, and I'll speak for the black progressives.
Fair enough.
and it's not clear at what point critical mass takes over. That is the great adventure. If the black leadership and progressives are silent, as they were before the primaries, as they were during the primaries, then all the push and all the pull comes from the right.
Well, I think that's a little too negative in the sense that, first of all, he's unleashed an enormous amount of energy. He's brought a new generation into politics. They will define their own politics over time. And what's interesting about the Obama phenomenon, when you look at his website and his Facebook, et cetera, you've got a furious debate going on there about closing Guantanamo, about going after the Bush people and indicting them for
legalizing
crimes,
marijuana,
et cetera. And so you've got a range of things that are totally off of Obama's agenda that are being driven, that are the most popular things on the website of his activists. So I think that energy is going to have its own momentum and it's going to create its own change.
Well, the question is, will they confront power? And when power is represented by Barack Obama, debating these issues is something that the left does all the time. Will they confront?
Final word.
I don't think that they're going to be confronting anytime soon. I think it is euphoria, and unfortunately it's the kind of euphoria I don't like, which is to say it's not from drugs, it's from politics.
Well, the Real News Network, assuming we raise more money, and we need you to click on the donate button if we're going to do what I'm about to say, which is we will confront, because we are journalists and we don't have to worry about drinking anybody's Kool-Aid. Thank you for joining the Real News Network on our coverage of the inauguration of President Obama. And I think this is also a great panel. We said at the end of our forum panel, this is a great beginning of a panel on domestic policy and economics. So I hope you will join us again. And please join us again on the Real News Network.